Evening everyone, and a very warm welcome to the State Library of New South Wales. I'm John Vallance, I'm the State Librarian, and along with the Honourable George Souris, President of the Library Council, we're delighted that you've been able to join us online this evening for the announcement of the winners of this year's National Biography Awards. We had the Shortlist announcement a couple of weeks ago, and I remember in my introduction then I said something about the way in which biography, the history of who we are, our own lives, is tied up to some extent in all sorts of very interesting ways in the country in which we live, on which we live. And in that spirit, I acknowledged at the beginning of proceedings this evening that I'm sitting on Gadigal land, in a library built out of Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'm sure you'll join me in doing that wherever you're sitting, watching me this evening. We're celebrating 24 years since the establishment by Geoffrey Keynes and Michael Crouch of the National Biography Award in 1996. I discussed the idea of the Biography Awards on more than one occasion with Michael before he died, and it was quite clear that he saw biography in much the same way that, say, Plutarch might have seen biography, as an improving moral exercise. Through reading about the lives of great people, we might in some sense get a sense of the debt that we owe our ancestors and the obligation on our shoulders to leave society better than we found it. But of course, biography is a much broader field than that. It has a very special pull on us. The idea of reading about other people's lives has a very special fascination. And I remember at university falling in love with Gertrude Stein. One of my favourite biographies was the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas. And then I moved on to Gertrude Stein's wonderful Everybody's autobiography. It's an infinitely interesting and engaging literary form, biography, and I hope that as a result of these awards this evening, you'll be inspired to go off and explore the range of material that's on offer today. We wouldn't be here this evening if it weren't for the generosity of the Nelson Mears Foundation that stepped in after the death of Michael Crouch to support these awards, not just with a view to continuing them, but expanding them. And in fact, Sam Mears instigated a special new award in memory of Michael Crouch, which we will be making this evening. So we're going to be giving away prizes with a total value this evening of $42,000, $25,000 for the winner, $2,000 for each of the 6 shortlisted authors, and then $5,000 for the new Michael Crouch Award, which is given for a first published biography by an Australian writer. There were 89 entries in the awards this year, so obviously I must start by thanking the judges. The senior judge for the 2020 National Biography Awards, Maggie Burns, and her companions, Mark McKenna and Richard White. We are truly grateful to you for the work you've put into these awards. And it now gives me great pleasure to introduce the senior judge, Maggie Burns, who's going to say something about this year's shortlist.
This year there were 89 entries submitted for the National Biography Award, and they ranged across classic biography, autobiography, intimate personal life writing and affectionate memoir. The subjects of the entries were equally diverse. We read accounts of the lives of the famous and the eminent, the not so well known and the obscure. There were books which reclaimed lives to history, books about women, about Indigenous people, about people from culturally diverse backgrounds. And it was noticeable this year that there were a number of books which described the experience of growing up with a disability. The 2020 shortlist is equally diverse. There are 2 biographies and 4 works which are more autobiographical in their nature, personal life writing. Russell Mcgregor tells the life story of Alec Chisholm, a pioneering nature conservationist who, when he died in 1976 at the age of not quite 86, he was in danger of slipping into obscurity. Patrick Mullins also reclaims the reputation of former Prime Minister Sir William McMahon, who, despite a very long career in politics and some significant achievements, was in danger of being completely overshadowed with the election of the Whitlam government. The four works which are more personal in their description of lives, that are autobiographical in their nature, all happen to be written by women, and they all tell of painful experiences. Chloe Higgins writes of her life trajectory following the death of her two younger sisters in a tragic car accident when she was only 17. Amra Pialic describes growing up between two worlds. She spent part of her childhood living in her grandmother's family home in an isolated rural village in Bosnia, and the remainder living in suburban Melbourne, growing up with her beloved mother who suffered from bipolar disorder. Jacqueline Kent is an established biographer, but her shortlisted book turns the attention to her own life experience as she remembers her relationship and brief marriage to the much older Australian author Kenneth Cook. Their marriage ended by his sudden death. And finally, Jessica White interweaves her own life story with historical biography as she reclaims the life of Maud Praed, daughter of a successful 19th century Australian novelist. Maud, like Jessica, profoundly deaf from early childhood. So these four books are books which traverse grief, loss, trauma, and hardship of various kinds, but they're fundamentally optimistic. They are testaments to resilience, to survival, to growth and recovery, and they're also beautiful portrayals of the places and the times the women have lived through. So I believe we have a very strong and diverse shortlist this year. It's a challenge for the judges that the books are so very different, and we're comparing different approaches to genre, to style, and to subject matter. It's worth noting that there are 5 works which are debut examples of biographical writing by the authors, and 4 are written by younger or early career authors, which is a great demonstration of the vitality of life writing in Australia. I congratulate all the shortlisted authors, and I sincerely thank the sponsors of the National Biography Award. It's such an important award to encourage excellence in biographical writing, and it's your generosity that enables this award to happen. Thank you.
The 2020 shortlist for the National Biography Award, which we announced on the 9th of July, includes these works. Beyond Words, A Year with Kenneth Cook by Jacqueline Kent, published by UQP. Hearing Maud by Jessica White, published by UWAP. Idling in Green Places, A Life of Alec Chisholm by Russell Mcgregor, published by Australian Scholarly Publishing. The Girls by Chloe Higgins, Picador. Things Nobody Knows But Me by Amra Pialic, published by Transit Lounge. And Tiberius with a Telephone, The Life and Stories of William McMahon by Patrick McMullins, Scribe. The first award to be presented this evening is the Michael Crouch Award for a first published biography by an Australian writer. It's valued at $5,000, and this year it's given to Jessica White for her debut work, Hearing Maud.
Hello everyone, I'm speaking to you from Meanjin, Brisbane. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Jagera and Turrbal people, and to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. First Nations people are this country's original storytellers, and I think it's important that we read their words. And by reading, I mean listening. Deaf people listen by reading hands, bodies, lips, and words. This is the sign in Auslan for thank you. It's easy to learn and read. Thank you to Maggie Byrne, Professor Mark McKenna, and Associate Professor Richard White for reading 89 books. I hope it was a good diversion during lockdown. Thank you to the Nelson Mears Foundation for sponsoring the Michael Crouch Award. I'm both overjoyed and humbled to receive this award, especially as I'm in such fine company among Jacqueline Kent, Russell Mcgregor, Chloe Higgins, Amra Pajlich, and Patrick Mullins. Hearing Maud is about the consequences of the entrenched and erroneous belief that deaf people are inferior to hearing people. I wanted to show that, although Maud Praed and I were born a century apart and our lives went in different directions, many of our experiences are the same, particularly in terms of discrimination and the expectation that we hide our deafness. I had no template for writing this book, but Terry Ann White, former publisher at UWA Publishing, understood what I was trying to do. I know I'm not alone when I say that Terry Ann's departure is a significant loss for Australia's literary ecosystem. Thank you, Terry Ann, for your unique vision and your unfailing hard work in supporting Australian writing. Thank you to my partner for keeping me in good spirits as I wrote. As my family will testify, that's no mean feat. My parents raised me in rural Australia. We were a long way from services, and they did an amazing job with limited resources. Thank you to my brother and sister and my parents for your unconditional love and unwavering support for my writing, particularly during the grumpy bits. Finally, thank you to everyone who has read or will read Hearing Maud. No one listened to Maud while she was alive, and it's so important to me to ensure that her words and the words of deaf people more generally are heard now.
And now I'd like to announce the winner of the 2020 National Biography Award. And this year's award goes to Patrick Mullins for his Tiberius with a Telephone, The Life and Stories of William McMahon.
Thank you so much. I want, first of all, to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm speaking. I live in Canberra, and this land is Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. I therefore want to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people and their elders past, present and emerging. I feel very grateful and honoured by this award. When I first began writing my book, very few people thought that a biography of the man regarded as this country's worst Prime Minister would be worthwhile. Why the hell would you want to write about Billy McMahon? That was always the question. My answer was always that there was more to McMahon than the caricature, more to McMahon than the big ears, the squeaky voice, and the incorrigible ambition, though there was that too. The historian Tom Griffiths has written that the great virtue of history is its willingness to acknowledge complexity, to use complexity to explore the past, the shades of grey, the twists and puzzles, the elusive possibilities. In recent years, there has been a great willingness in this country to look at the past, to grapple with uncomfortable knowledge, and to ask thorny questions, and in doing so, to weave what Griffiths also calls the fundamental fabric of a common humanity. This country is the richer for it, and it must continue. Right now, however, that endeavour is in danger. From plans to increase the cost of education in the humanities, to cuts to the cultural institutions that are entrusted with so much of this country's past, the ability to weave that common humanity by study of our history and by artistic endeavour is under threat. I would therefore call on those who gather here on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country to reconsider. I want to thank the judges, the benefactors, the State Library of New South Wales for this award, and I want to acknowledge the shortlisted authors as well. Finally, I want to thank all of those who supported me and this book. I'm deeply honoured and I'm forever grateful. Thank you.
Congratulations to Jessica White and Patrick Mullins. And that is the end of this year's NBA awards ceremony. I very much hope that it won't be too long before we're allowed to crawl out of our digital rabbit holes back into the open air again and meet face to face. But it's been wonderful having you with us online this evening. Good night.